Welcome back. It's time for Silver and Black today. Yes, you're going to spend some time with two guys who really, really, really want you to subscribe to this podcast. That's right. Do us a favor if you don't already subscribe. We are an Odyssey original podcast covering the Raiders. You can do so wherever you get your audio. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you guys for being there. We love the YouTube crowd and the chat, which I am always involved in. Mo, I'm getting a lot of crap from people that you're not in there. And I keep trying to tell people with your duties that it's hard for you to jump in there because the show's on Tuesday, Thursdays. You have things going on those days where you can't always jump in the chat. But just understand that it would be like I don't know, Diddy or Kanye walking into a room if you came into the chat. That's how bad people want you in the chat.
Come on, Scott. I'm not in that high demand. I mean,
I don't know. You got your own merchandise. I mean, holy moly.
I'm just a dude with good Wi-Fi in Brooklyn, New York. That's all I am.
All right. Well, Moe Moton, by the way, besides being known by his more lovable name, which is Midtown Mo, you can get the merchandise from our friends at DC4L Custom Tees. All of the merchandise sold there, including our Irish Cannon, Aiden O'Connell, even though people tell me I hate Aiden O'Connell, even though we came up with a nickname and a t-shirt for him. You can get there, and all the proceeds go to our good friends at Raiders Fan Radio and the One Nation Foundation, which helped the Bolitnikoff Foundation, Raider Dad, and Josh Kamite out there in Las Vegas, brings kids to games. So if you want to go buy a Midtown Mo shirt or a hoodie like he's wearing on the show today, if you're watching us, you can do that. There it is. Look at that. Now, Mo, I don't think you're a tattoo guy, but would you get that tattooed on your arm maybe? Or you're not a tattoo guy?
I'm not a big tattoo guy, but if I were to get a tattoo, I'd probably like get it on my in my upper shoulder area, I guess you could say.
Yeah, where even if you have a tank top on, necessarily people won't see it.
Yeah. You know, I've been told that I have good shoulders.
Oh,
been told that
there you go.
A lot, so that's why you gotta emphasize the good parts of your appearance. You know, when you get a tattoo, don't get a tattoo. If you have skinny legs, don't get a tattoo on your bony chicken legs. You know, get a tattoo where people look and go, okay, nice spot, nice body part. Get it there. So I'll get it on my shoulder.
Oh boy, we gotta be careful with talking about body parts now. But yeah, and I'm not a tattoo guy either. I don't have anything against tattoos. I'm just not a tattoo guy. Like I've never gotten one. I almost got one in college on my ankle of Hey Reb, which is the UNLV mascot. So, but I relented. I stopped at the last minute. I was not inebriated enough to do that. And I'm glad I did, because I don't think I would have wanted to do it. And I've not had the urge. But for all of you that get tattoos, I understand it. It's a passion, whatever. But anyway, so if you get a Midtown Mo tattoo, I don't know what to come up with something. Maybe give them some award. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Anyway, we're here to talk about Raiders football. Maybe if it's a woman, she gets a date with Mo, and then Mo, you dating girl. She's got a Midtown Mo tattoo. I mean, that shows commitment.
You know what's funny though? Even though I don't have any tattoos, I find tattoos on women attractive. Not, you know, just no tattoos on the face. No offense to anybody who has tattoos, tattoos. I just not my thing. All power to you, but you know, nothing wrong with tattoos.
Okay, so listen, anybody out there, any listeners or viewers on YouTube, if you are a woman, if you date a woman, or married to a woman, please take pictures of their tattoos, tag Mo and SNB Today.
Oh my goodness.
And show us what you got, especially if they're Raiders tattoos, you know, or St. John's tattoos, right? That's your alma mater.
I'm not trying to collect the tattoos of wives of our listeners. That's not really my thing, but you know, all power to you. That's what you want to do.
Oh, it reminds me of real quick side story. And yes, we will get into the Raiders. This was probably, it's probably about 10 years ago, 8 years ago now. There was on Twitter, there was an account, this guy at the University of Kansas started a Twitter handle called KU Boobs. I'm keeping it family friendly. I'm not calling, but that was and it was these girls would send in pictures to this Twitter handle and they would post them on game day. And it was quite the viral sensation for a while. I'll just put it that way. Okay. Enough of Weird stuff. We're going to get into Raider football now. And Mo, obviously, the story until it's not a story is going to be vacancies with the Raiders, and that is at coach, head coach, and at GM. Let's talk about coaching interviews. There have been no reports of the Raiders talking to any head coaching candidates. Does not mean they haven't. It's just there's been no reports yet. Usually these things tend to get out, especially from agents who like to release that, hey, their guy is interviewing for a head coaching job. But that leaves the impression that the early reports that this is really a two-man race between if Jim Harbaugh, again, we don't know if Jim Harbaugh even wants to coach the Raiders, but between him and, of course, Antonio Pierce, who finished out the season strong for the Raiders at the interim level. But the bigger news has been Raiders coaches in demand. Even though there's not news on the head coaching front, the current staff, as we expected, right? We talked about it last show. They're garnering interest from other teams. Carmen Bursillo, the offensive line coach, interviewed with the Giants for the same position. So we talked about it last time. Remember that coaches don't just leave for steps up. They will leave often for lateral moves, depending on the situation and the coach. Secondarily, Patrick Graham interviewed with the LA Chargers as a head coach. But I also would say that just like the Raiders interviewed Tom Telesco, the former GM of the Chargers, to me, that's a little bit of gamesmanship. I'm not poo-pooing Patrick Graham as a candidate. I'm just saying it's in the division. I'm sure the Chargers are doing the same thing the Raiders have. We did hear on Wednesday that Patrick Graham, this was from Ian Rappaport, quote, Patrick Graham received a request to interview for a defensive coordinator job, but was blocked by the Raiders. They will allow the new head coach and a decision on inherited staff members. So we see the Raiders saying, if you're talking to Patrick Graham about a DC job, we're not going to let you. What do you take from that and from these job interviews for Graham and for Bursillo?
For Bursillo, as we talked about in the last show, probably he sees a better situation under Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka. He probably sees a better fit, maybe doesn't see a long-term future with the Raiders, whatever the case may be, his decision, right? Patrick Graham's situation is interesting because, as you mentioned, the Raiders blocked an interview request from the Chargers for a defensive coordinator job, but he will still, the request for the head coaching position with the Chargers still stands. So again, as you said, it's probably just in-division gamesmanship where they just want to pick Patrick Graham's brain because they know the Chargers should know that there's a possibility that Patrick Graham remains with the Raiders, especially if the Raiders hire Antonio Pierce as their full-time head coach. So I understand why the Raiders blocked that interview request. It makes sense. It's smart. You don't want a division rival getting any type of insight on what you're doing, what you had done in the previous season. So I totally get that. But I honestly feel like Patrick Graham, and again, I'm not downplaying what Patrick Graham has done for the Raiders defense. The Raiders defense finished 9th in scoring. But I don't see Patrick Graham getting a head coaching job. One, because I think offensive-minded head coaches are going to be more in demand. I think it's hard for a defensive coach to now get a job in the NFL. Pete Carroll was just moved or transitioned to a front office advisory role. He has a defensive background. You don't hear a lot about defensive guys being top candidates. Now, Mike Vrabel is probably the top guy. Mike McDonald also with the Baltimore Ravens, a top guy. But Mike Vrabel now has head coaching experience going to the playoffs, going to an AFC championship game. Mike McDonald has arguably the best defense in the league. So it takes that level of accomplishment for a defensive-minded head coaching candidate to get, these interviews. So with Patrick Graham, while he's done a fine job with the Raiders, I think he's probably either A, going to stick around, especially if the Raiders hire Antonio Pierce, or B, if the Raiders hire Jim Harbaugh or any other head coach, even Mike Vrabel, so to speak, who has a defensive background, then I could see Patrick Graham going somewhere else, finding a situation that best suits him, and continuing to be a fine defensive coordinator.
Yeah. And by the way, in segment 2, we're going to dispel some myths about coaching staffs and things that could happen with the Raiders. So stay tuned for that. But I want to touch on a little bit here too, because the one thing, yes, the Raiders, I understand fully and completely agree with the Raiders doing everything, no matter who the head coach is, trying to keep Patrick Graham. You have continuity. Obviously, his defense, it clicked, right? It clicked halfway through the season. Does Antonio Pierce get some credit for that? Of course he does, but also Patrick Graham should get the lion's share of it because he's the one who runs the defenses, doing the play calling, and Pierce is obviously was on his staff. The thing that people forget, though, is because things go well, remember, these coaches were brought in by Josh McDaniels. No matter what you think of Josh McDaniels and how it went, not all of them were really close to McDaniels, but that doesn't mean that this opportunity and where they're at now is where they want to be based on when they originally came to the Raiders. They came to work with Josh McDaniels under that regime with Dave Ziegler and all that. That's changed. That's not a slight on Pierce or anybody else or Champ Kelly, but it's changed. And so when you have a change in leadership, not everybody wants to stick around, even if they've been successful, even if they like Antonio Pierce. They may look at other opportunities. Carmen Braceau obviously was a Josh McDaniels guy from New England, the whole thing. So you understand that a little more, but we don't know what's in Patrick Graham's heart. We don't know if Patrick Graham wants to stick around. We don't know how Patrick Graham feels about being passed over for Antonio Pierce for the interim job. You don't know. So I would love to see him stay, but I like the fact that the Raiders are not getting in his way if he interviews for a head coaching job. Now, you can interview for a head coaching job with a team, and then they can come back and ask you to be the defensive coordinator, right? Now, Patrick Graham has a contract, but there's all sorts of ways around that. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that this gamesmanship and the kind of naivety where you think that the coaches are just going to stay if Antonio Pierce is there. No, there's turnover on every staff every year, right, Mo?
Right. And I just want to make a quick point that I think people are glossing over this, and it's Mark Davis's process in this. Now, remember, while you have to wait until after the divisional round to have a in-person interview with your head coaching candidates, that's across the board, whether the coordinator is with a team in the playoffs or not, to even the playing field, you cannot have any in-person interviews until after the division round of the playoffs. Right. You can have virtual interviews, and you can also interview in-house. So the Chargers have already interviewed Giff Smith, their interim head coach, for the head coaching position. The Raiders have not done that with Antonio Pierce yet, but that's not a reason to be, worried that Antonio Pierce is not in the running for the head coaching candidacy. I think the Raiders are doing it the right way, where they're going to focus on the general manager first, because if you kept up on the tracker, the Raiders have requested for general manager candidates to interview. So it's clear that they're putting the horse before the cart. They're going through they're going to go through their general manager candidates first. In my opinion, they're going to hire the general manager first, and then they're going to start to go through their head coaching candidates.
Right. And a lot of us, I think, jump to the conclusion first. And I've since kind of changed my mind a little bit about this, which is, well, geez, they interview Ed Dodds, has a connection to Jim Harbaugh. Ed Dodds was with the Raiders before, remember, at the same time Jim Harbaugh was there as a coach. That's where that goes back to. And so if it's Ed Dodds, then, that must mean Jim Harbaugh. Not necessarily. If it's Champ Kelly, well, does that mean that most likely Antonio Pierce is going to be the coach? I think there's a better chance of that being true. But we just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going on with Mark Davis. And as frustrating as it can be not to have answers yet, because I think Raider Nation Mo wants to just kind of know what's going on. Mark Davis, remember, he made up his mind before the season ended last year that he was going to go get, or 2 years ago, that he was going to go get Josh McDaniels. He admitted this. He said, this time I'm going to give it time and think. So the fact that he is living up to that thus far is very important. That means he's thinking about it. He's talking to folks, whoever his advisors are. And the fact that he's taking time to look for a GM and look for a coach, I think bodes well, because then you're not making a snap decision. And it also plays into your point about not being able to really talk to anybody in person anyway until after the divisional round. Exactly. And that's great. And then, of course, like you said, yesterday, Seattle opens up. Nobody thought that job was going to be open up. Vrabel gets fired this week. Nobody thought that was necessarily going to happen. And we knew there was a possibility. There's a lot of great jobs out there. There's a lot of opportunity for coaches. So the Raiders, if the Raiders are really just focused on two people, then it makes it a little easier for them. But those two people, you don't know either. There might be opportunities. I mean, if it goes on too long, Antonio Pierce might get an offer to be a defensive coordinator somewhere and have an opportunity to go that place. It could be in Detroit. It could be wherever you're going to go. So it'll be interesting. You mentioned the GM search, and I want to run through that real quick before we end the segment. Ed Dodds, of course, we talked about Colts, ties to Jim Harbaugh and the Raider organization. So he's been a Raider in the past. Tom Telesco, much more. And you brought up on Twitter the other day about he's a good judge of talent. The Chargers have never been able to take that talent and do anything with it, but from a pure judge of talent, good thing, but also he's in the division, so there's gamesmanship there. They've also talked to 49ers assistant GM Adam Peters. Everybody in the 49ers organization is hot right now because of how they've been. And then meanwhile, Champ Kelly has been given permission to talk to the Carolina Panthers. So there's other interest in Champ Kelly, which we knew was going to happen. He's interviewed for GM jobs the last 3 years. And so you can't think too that Champ Kelly, although the conversation has been he wants to stay in Las Vegas, he's got kids, he's got a family, he might have another opportunity to go somewhere that's greater for him. So the GM job being first, I wouldn't read too much into it about the selection of the coach. It could go. Ed Dodds could be the GM, and they could hire Antonio Pierce. Doesn't mean Jim Harbaugh's coming, but certainly I think that this whole process is going about it the right way.
Yeah, and 2 names to add to that, the candidates list for GMs for the GM position: Terrence Gray, who's a personnel director with the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills, obviously, they've won the AFC West title for how many years now? So, of course, their executives are going to be on the hot ticket. Also, Trey Brown, who's a senior personnel director or executive with the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yep.
Ever since Joe Burrow's got there, that Bengals team has been pretty good. Now, Joe Burrow got hurt this year, so they fizzled out. Still finished 9-8 with Jake Browning, which is commendable considering a lot of people didn't expect much from Jake Browning. But obviously, there's some respect for the Bengals scouting team over there. But I will say this, too. The other thing to note about this process the Raiders are going through with their general manager candidates is, remember we talked about this, Scott? You don't want to have your general manager and your head coach necessarily be buddy-buddy, because that's, in my opinion, that's what hurt the Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels dynamic. Reportedly, one guy had just way more power than the other, and the other guy may have been hesitant to exercise his power in that relationship. So I support having a general manager who's not necessarily good friends or seriously connected with his head coach, because you want to have a healthy respect between the two positions, your general manager and your head coach, and be able for both individuals to come in there and have their opinions heard. Maybe sometimes your head coach may have a better idea at a certain position than your general manager. Sometimes your general manager has a better idea than your head coach, because, as I said, the general manager is supposed to have a long-term vision of what the roster should be. You want to be able to not only be successful for a year, but sustain that success. The head coach usually has a short-term vision of what he wants. I need this guy right now. I need this position filled right now. I need this player right now. Yes. And the general manager has to be able to push back and say, well, what is that player going to cost? Yeah. Well, over time, what is that contract going to look like? What about the draft? Maybe we could do something at the draft versus paying a player in free agency. So you want to have that healthy back and forth. So I think it's important to have that separation between general manager and head coach. Not that one is necessarily above the other, but that they're on an equal playing field when it comes to making roster personnel decisions.
Right. And I think, you saw the situation. I mean, the Bill Belichick situation where he's been the GM and coach for 20 years is unusual today. You have coaches who have more influence over personnel. There's a big difference, because I think this has come up in the Harbaugh discussion, and we'll kind of talk about that when we talk about myths in the next segment. And that is that, well, if Harbaugh comes in, he has to pick the GM. No. And I don't think there's any thought that he wants that. What he does want, or what a veteran coach like a Vrabel, somebody like that, what they're going to want is to know that the GM, whoever it is, that they have a good working relationship. So that's the other advantage to hiring the GM first, Mo, is if it's Harbaugh, if it's Pierce, whoever it is you get the GM in there, and then the candidates you do interview as coach, you bring them in to meet the GM, and is there a connection there? Is there a good work? And again, these guys don't have to be best friends. They're not going to go out yachting together. It has to be a good working. I mean, we all have that in business, right, Mo? We all have people we work with. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be best friends with them, but it does mean that you have a good working relationship. You have to have a good working relationship where there's give and take. Hey, I want this player, GM. Okay, coach, I hear you on that, but listen to me from a long-term perspective. If we go that direction, then we're going to be cutting off our opportunity to go strengthen the offensive line because you want this position. We can do that, but you understand the trade-off. That's the kind of thing you need. You don't need somebody who's just going to come in, unfortunately, good man and all, like Mike Mayock, where John Gruden just says, hey, you got to do this. Like, that's not what you want. And I think that's what you're alluding to, is it's better that they're separate, good working relationship, but not fraternity brothers, i.e., McDaniels and Ziegler.
Right. Your head coach is always going to have a powerful influence because he is running the roster. So, of course, he's going to have significant input. But you want your general manager to be able to push back on him on certain moments because the general manager is responsible for the most part, for putting together the draft
The
class.
team.
That's
Yes.
long-term view. So you have to have that balance of power. We talk about
Yeah.
checks and balances in the government, right? The
Yeah.
same kind of deal, similar kind of deal.
Yeah.
Where you want to have those checks and balances between the two powerful positions.
And he also has to, or she has to manage the cap with the capologist. Usually have an attorney who handles all the contracts. That's important too these days. Yes, there's ways around it and all that stuff, but you have to watch the resources. So they are the CEO of the entire football operation with the coach running the football side of things on the field. So you come to the CEO and say, hey, CEO, I need this asset, that asset, and this asset to be able to put a more competitive team on the field. And then the CEO, i.e. the GM, looks at it and says, okay, I can give you this, I can give you that. These other positions we're going to have to go through the draft because we just don't have money to go spend on a top level free agent defensive end, right? So we have to be able to do that. So that's where the relationship matters. And I think absolutely right and dead on with that, Mo. So good stuff. Okay, we are going to step aside for our first break. When we come back, the smartest man in the room, Moe Moton, is going to help us dispel some rumors. Not rumors, I shouldn't say it. Myths about what might happen with the Raiders, depending who the coach is. People are making statements, well, if this happens, then that happens. It's not so, folks. We're going to go through some of those common ones and give you our view on them and hopefully give you some fodder to think about. Even if you don't agree with all of them, that's cool. You can leave it in the comments and let us know. But we're going to get into that next on segment number 2. This is Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast, also heard on the radio in Las Vegas on The Bet. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Silver and Black Today. We are here to give you truth. That's right. Not arguments for our sake of arguments or ridiculousness. No, we're here to talk about Las Vegas Raiders football and to dispel some myths in this segment here on our Odyssey original podcast, also heard on the radio in Las Vegas on The Bet. So if you're listening to us on the radio in Las Vegas, hope you're doing well in the Mojave Desert. All right, we're back. We're talking Raiders football. Do us a favor, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio, and hello to the YouTube audience again. All right, Mo, I want to put some of these things. I get in these conversations and look, we say it all the time here. I love interacting with our listeners and Raider fans out there. I get some people who say, why do you interact with these people? You're a professional. No, that's what it's about. That's our listeners. The fans are the people who make this thing go, not only for us, but any of the content creators, right? So I like to mix it up with them. Sometimes I choose the wrong ones to interact with because sometimes I don't know what's going on the other end. It's kind of strange. So, but overall, though, some of the discussion, honest discussion around the Raiders coaching search and what's going on, not only does it get hyperbolic in the atmosphere, much like the whole car wars situation, but also people, because again, it's our job to know a little more than the average fan because we cover sports across the board. We cover football across the board. And so when people start throwing out, positives and negatives about coaching candidates, I find that so many of them are half truths or they're based on some sort of opinion that might be valid or might not be valid. And so I wanted to go through some of those and get your response to them because these are some of the responses I'm getting and we see here on the YouTube channel as well, which is first I'll start with around Antonio Pierce is this idea. So we know how much the locker room cares for, appreciates, and played hard for. There's no questioning that for Antonio Pierce when he took over as coach. So I see a lot of fans, if Pierce doesn't get the job, the locker room will revolt. They won't be listened to again, just like they weren't listened to with Rich Bisaccia, even though those situations are very different. Mo, when you hear that, what do you think?
That it's so far from the truth simply for the simple fact that NFL player is not going to all of a sudden light a fire to his career and quit because he didn't get the right head coach for the team going forward. These players put so many years into their careers. They play through injuries. They got families to feed. You think they're going to stop playing or play at a less than above of their highest potential because they didn't get the head coach they wanted. This is not daycare. You don't throw temper tantrums when you don't get what you want. These are professional grown men. And I told someone on the X, and I said, someone asked me an honest question. How do I think the Raiders will respond if they don't hire Antonio Pierce? And I said to the person, they'll respond the same way they responded after the Raiders didn't hire Rich Bisaccia. They'll be disappointed. They'll be angry. They'll probably be pissed off about it. But at the end of the day, they still have a job to do. They still have a career to continue. They still have a family to feed, a lot of them. And they want to make some money and win football games. They'll be upset. But they're going to have to move on if the Raiders don't hire Antonio Pierce. So, yeah, they'll be upset. But calling for a locker room revolt or mutiny, riot, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to happen.
Right. And it's interesting, too, because clearly I think when folks hear about, well, he's so good and he brought the locker room together, all things that Antonio Pierce did and deserves all the credit for, right? He brought everybody together, kind of unified the team after the Josh McDaniels disaster. But when you think of, the locker room this, the locker room that, listen, it's important, but you can't, again, does a veteran player like Devontae Adams or Max Crosby, does their opinion hold more impact with the owner, with the GM that is? Absolutely. They want to listen to them, just like when I was in the corporate world and they were hiring somebody that was going to manage me, like a VP, okay, at the time, and I'm a director. They let me interview the VP, but guess what? I give them my feedback. I like this. I didn't like that. I like this. Could you work with them? Yes, I could work with them. Or, well, I could work with them, but I think this would be difficult. And then they say, okay, thank you for your feedback. And then they make their decision, right? It's an informed decision. You don't decide. So there's no team in the world, in my view. Yes, it certainly helps the candidate and their candidacy if you're well liked and the locker room is playing hard for you and appreciates you and wants you. But that's not the only factor. So to your point, these guys want to win. Yes, they would be disappointed. And it also, just like Devontae Adams said last year, it also, what's the plan? Now, if you go out and you hired some retread that was not great, like Josh McDaniels, then I could see the players being like, oh man, so you didn't keep Pierce, but you brought in this guy. Now, you bring in a guy like Jim Harbaugh or Mike Vrabel, somebody like that, the disappointment, I think, quickly turns to, what's the opportunity here? Because these guys are pros. And at the end of the day, like you hear from Max Crosby, Mo, they just want to freaking win. Okay? So whoever's going to get us there faster, I don't care if they're a freaking purple people eater machine. I don't care if they're a freaking alien. It doesn't matter. As long as they can get on board, they let them be who they are. I think that's the important piece that you learn from Antonio Pierce that is a throwback to the old Raider Al Davis days, which is let guys be who they are. And I think as long as you have a coach who understands that from a talent perspective, from a locker room perspective, I don't think you lose anything.
You know the fastest way to get players to buy in after you move on from a beloved head coach? You win football games.
Yes.
Because let me tell you, if they move on from Antonio Pierce and they hire, I'll just throw a name out there, and they hire Mike Vrabel, right?
Right.
Players would be upset that they moved on from Antonio Pierce, but guess what? The Raiders start the season 6-0. Do you think they're like, oh, we're 6-0, but man, I wish we had Antonio Pierce here? I think I'm gonna quit, even though we're 6-0. I think I'm gonna. You know what? I'm not gonna play football anymore. I'm just gonna quit. I'm not gonna play to my best ability. I'm just gonna dog it for the rest of the season. We're 6-0, but I want Antonio Pierce back.
Yeah,
not gonna happen. And by the way, I'm old enough to remember when the Raiders were gonna revolt or have a mutiny or a riot if they didn't hire Rich Bisaccia. That didn't happen. I'm old enough to remember, really quick, Scott. I'm old enough to remember when Devontae Adams was supposed to throw a temper tantrum because the Raiders moved on from Derek Carr. That didn't happen. I think people are just agents of chaos where they just want to see chaos. Because every time something happens, people say,
emotional.
People are going to quit, and this guy's going to ask to be out. This guy's going to ask to be traded. It hasn't happened.
Right. And I think you look at it too. You go back. I had one longtime Raider fan, reach out to me and say, hey, he said, do you remember? And I don't, because I didn't cover the team then, but he said, do you remember when the fans were going nuts and demanded that the Raiders hire Hugh Jackson? It was the same kind of thing, right? And then Hugh Jackson was not successful with the Raiders, right? I'm not saying Antonio Pierce can't be successful, because I think he can, but I'm just saying the idea that you hire a coach because all of the fan base and because the players want them to is not based in reality. It's a factor, no question, but it's not based in reality. All right, Mo, the other thing is if Pierce gets the job, then the staff will stay together and you can just continue to build. As we said in the first segment, there's coaches like Brasillo and Graham already interviewing other spots. Doesn't mean they will leave, but they're going to have a lot of these coaches, especially on the defensive side of the ball who did well, they're going to have opportunities to go elsewhere. So if Antonio Pierce is the head coach, there's no guarantee other guys stay.
You're right about that. I believe other assistants are already getting requests. So now you would hope that Antonio Pierce can at least retain Patrick Graham. And I think there's a high chance that if Antonio Pierce stays, that Patrick Graham stays. High chance, not a lot.
High chance.
High chance that it could happen, but it's not a guarantee that everyone stays together. Antonio Pierce, remember, if he becomes the head coach, he would have inherited the staff that Josh McDaniels put together. So there may be certain guys that Josh McDaniels like that Antonio Pierce necessarily doesn't want to hold those positions in the upcoming season and beyond. So there will probably, I'll say there will be changes if Antonio Pierce is hired full-time, simply because this isn't the staff that he put together. Remember, this is Josh McDaniels' staff. Antonio Pierce was just part of that staff.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And that's the thing too. It's like there's no guarantees in life. And so just because he stays and he's hired as the permanent coach doesn't mean that they all stay together. In fact, even when teams, especially when teams win, as you'll see this year with the Lions, the 49ers, more people will peel off. It's a testament to the coaching staff that when they do that, like you've seen with the 49ers, with Mike McDaniel, with Sully, even though he hasn't had a great success in New York as of now, you'll see, though, those guys are in demand, and then they just backfill because they have good connections and they're able to do that. All right, next one. If Harbaugh gets the job, let's say Jim Harbaugh gets the job, and this could go for anybody, Mike Vrabel, whatever, then it's going to be another 2 to 3 year rebuild. Why do people think that because you switch coaches? Now, again, Antonio Pierce, to his credit, had nice success at the end of the year, especially with the defense. Even if Patrick Graham and Antonio Pierce leave, now, if you went to a different defensive scheme and you don't have the right bodies there, I understand the system change. That can really muck things up because players are used to something. But if you don't, you bring in a coach, similar philosophies on defense, realizes what he has on defense and wants to win. Because guess what? I don't care what coach it is, Mo, the pressure to win right away in the NFL is heavy. Okay. So nobody wants to come in to a team that won 8 games and say, well, we need 3 years. No. You're 8 games. You were basically 2.5, based on tiebreakers, 2.5 games away from making the playoffs. Okay. Mm-hmm. You don't tear that down. And because the coaching change happens, doesn't mean that you can't continue that success.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out that for the people that are saying that if Harbaugh comes, it's going to be a 2-3 rebuild. Check Harbaugh's track record, right? He's turned everywhere he's been. He's either elevated or turned around that team within 2 years. And I think at every stop, he's turned it around within 1 year. The only exception is Stanford. It took him 2 years to lead Stanford to a winning record. But he hasn't had a losing season since like 2008. So for the people that say, oh, it's going to be an arduous rebuild, not necessarily true if you look at Harbaugh's track record. The other thing about starting over with a new head coach is the Miami Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel last year, right? He brought him to the playoffs in his first season in Miami. That wasn't a long rebuild. The Texans hired DeMeco Ryans and have a rookie quarterback. Took them 1 year to turn it around and make the playoffs. And this is a franchise, by the way, the Houston Texans were a dumpster fire last year. They were a laughing stock. They were firing head coaches left and right. They went through 2 guys, an interim and a 1 year guy. And they said, okay, the Texans aren't, I remember reading the Texans aren't an appealing job because they're firing head coaches at a high rate. They have a high turnover rate. DeMeco Ryans comes in there. They draft CJ Stroud. Lo and behold, they're in the playoffs. Not only in the playoffs, they won the division.
A home game.
They won a division. They have a home game. They're hosting the Cleveland Browns this weekend. So I don't want to hear about, oh, it's definitely going to be a long rebuild, because we've seen other teams turn around within 1 year. I'm in New York. Yes. Brian Daboll comes here his first year, takes the Giants to the playoffs with Daniel Jones. So if you have the right head coach and you nail the quarterback position, which the Raiders do have to do, you can get back to the playoffs within 1 year, even with a new head coach.
Correct. And you look at and again, I know people, oh, you're a shill, you want Harbaugh, and I think Harbaugh would be the best choice for the Raiders because of where they're at.
I
So
agree.
I'm full disclosure that I don't know if Harbaugh wants to coach the Raiders. I'm just saying if he's available to them, that should be their number one choice. I had people tell me, well, he almost got fired at Michigan. He didn't get almost fired at Michigan. When he got to Michigan in 2015, in 2014, Michigan was 5-7 the year before. He gets there, they go 10-3 the next year, Mo. 10-3. His worst year at Michigan was 2017 when he went 8-5. And there was some blowback in 2017. They had some issues there. Then they go 10-3, 9-4. Then they go 2-4 with the COVID year because they only played 6 games. Then 12-2, 13-1, and 15-0. Like, look, if you want Antonio Pierce for the reasons you want him and you don't want anything to do with Jim Harbaugh, again, make the argument, but don't say he's not successful and he doesn't turn teams around, because he does. And I think that's important. And the Raiders don't need turning around. Well, they do on offense, that's for sure. And overall, the Raiders need turning around, which is the entire culture around the football team and winning. It hasn't happened. So there you go.
So I just want to say one thing before people, because I know people in the chat or people hearing this will say, about what I said about Harbaugh not having a llosing season. He hasn't had a losing full-time season since 2008 with Stanford. You mentioned the COVID year at Michigan. That was an incomplete year. A lot of the college teams none of the college teams, I believe, played a full schedule.
Right.
So I'm not counting that year, but when it comes to full seasons, Harbaugh hasn't had a losing season since 2008 with Stanford. Just want to
and then, but when people are really getting to empty space with their argument when they're like, well, yeah, but he never beat Ohio State until the last 3 years. Okay. Well, that's a rivalry in college football. I get that. But I think a national championship sort of kind of negates all of that. And not only that, but the fact that he beat him the last 3 years in a row. So you again, if you don't like Harbaugh for whatever reason, come up with a reason though. And I think that's why it's hard, because there's not big reason. Cheating. Okay, fine. You want to talk about that? That's a fair point. If indeed he did cheat and it's proven, great. Then you can say, well, what does that say about his character? There are other coaches, including Antonio Pierce, who were involved in scandals like that too. Not quite to the same level as Michigan with video and all that, but his was more recruiting. So nobody's perfect is what I'm getting to. Pierce isn't perfect. Harbaugh's not perfect. Vrabel's not perfect, but make sure whatever coach you're in favor of and you want to talk about it, just know the facts. That's why we're trying to dispel some of these myths.
And full disclosure, really quick, Scott, Jim Harbaugh, I don't know if people know this listening to this program, but Jim Harbaugh is my top choice for the Raiders. Antonio Pierce is my second choice. I've been consistent.
We both said that.
I've been consistent with this, saying that if Jim Harbaugh says no, Antonio Pierce is the choice.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. 100%. Our next one, we got time for one more, and then we got to get to our mailbag for the week, which is all Antonio Pierce needs to do is get a great offensive coordinator. And again, this goes back to discussion we had last show too about coaching networks. Now, a good GM might be able to help with that. But again, will a top flight offensive coordinator who doesn't know Antonio Pierce take a risk? Because listen, if you're a guy and you're trying to move up the ladder, you want to be an OC and then you want to become a head coach eventually. Do you want to hook your trailer to a guy who doesn't have experience as a coordinator or as a head coach? Now, they could meet, hit it off, and boom, they're in. That's fine. It can happen. Not saying it couldn't happen, but that's part of the risk here, isn't it not, Mo?
It's part of the risk, but I can also see it both ways. If you're an offensive coordinator and you're thinking about taking the Raiders job laterally, or if let's say you're a quarterback's coach or a position coach, and you're looking at the Raiders OC job under Antonio Pierce specifically, it could be appealing in the sense that you know that Antonio Pierce is not going to meddle in what you want to do. So the problem with having an offensive-minded head coach, if you're an OC or an upcoming OC, is that people might give that credit to the head coach. Remember Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City? People were giving all the credit to Andy Reid because he's the more known offensive mind. Now, if you're an OC who wants more of the credit, then you would prefer a situation where your head coach is not an offensive play call, because then if the offense is successful, you will definitely get those head coaching interviews and requests. I think Bobby Slowick is a good example in Houston. Yeah. D'Amico Ryans has a defensive background, so all the offensive credit goes to Bobby Slowick.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And it's interesting though, too. I think a lot of folks too ask me in closing here, hey, well, if Harbaugh gets a job, maybe he'll keep Antonio Pierce, maybe, and if Graham leaves, maybe Antonio Pierce can be the DC. While that would be awesome for everybody, especially fans, I don't think it happens. I think you look at situations going back to the '80s where you had Mike Ditka and Buddy Ryan, who had experience, and there's a level where you want guys to be. And I don't look if I'm Antonio Pierce, if the Raiders don't hire me as the head coach, I'm not sure I want to stick around. Even as much as he loves the players and he loves the Raiders and all that stuff, if he's got an opportunity laterally to go somewhere else or to become a DC somewhere else, he might do that too. So it's going to be all fluid, Mo, until we get some answers here around the interview processes and see who actually is up for the Raiders job. But we're going to just have a discussion on some of those things too. So we'll see what folks have to say in the chat. All right, we're going to step aside for our final break. When we come back, we'll close out the show with our mailbag. We got some great voicemails, and we will get to those here on Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast, also heard on the Bet in Las Vegas. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, Silver and Black Today. We are in the home stretch on this edition of the show. Moe Moton, Scott Gulbransen with you. Mo is the senior NFL writer at Bleacher Report covering the league. He also writes about the Raiders. He's a Raiders columnist up on sportsnot.com. Follow him on x.com at Moe Moton, Moemoton. You can follow me at LV Gully, where I also write about the Raiders and other stuff up on sportsnot.com. So thank you guys for being with us. All right, we're going to get into our mailbag. So during the season, we tend to do, and I know we got a little bit off track towards the end of this past season with our mailbag show separately, but now in the off season, we combine it with our second show of the week. And if you want to be a part of it, you can always email us at mail@silverandblacktoday.com. That's mail@silverandblacktoday.com. Or you can call us and leave us a voicemail at area code 702-900. That's 702-900-7869. All right, we're going to get into these calls, Mo. You ready? We got first up, we have Mark from Massachusetts. Mark from Massachusetts, here we go.
Hi, this is Mark from Massachusetts. And I was just wondering, with all the talk of who's going to be the head coach and Antonio Pierce rising from linebacker coach to becoming interim head coach, why isn't there the possibility of him becoming an assistant coach? It's still an upgrade over being a linebacker coach. He can gain experience. I don't understand why it has to be a black and white situation of he either gets the job or he doesn't. I was confused a few years ago when they had that with the other interim head coach, that it was just like an all or nothing. He has to become the head coach or he's gone. I was just wondering if you could possibly explain that. Anyways, thank you. Love the show. And yeah, thanks.
All right, there we go. A new caller, Mark from Massachusetts, proving once again that Raider Nation is not only nationwide, but worldwide. And it's a good question. We talked a little bit about it in the last segment, Mo, but I understand it. People kind of, you want the best of both worlds. You like the energy and the job that Antonio Pierce has done with the Raiders. But if he doesn't get the job, and let's say it's a Jim Harbaugh or somebody else, you'd like to keep him around because you like him so dang much. But that all depends on the coach, right? Because again, sort of like a political office, and I know it's weird to compare these two, but with a political office or a public position, let's say you work in a city or a government, most people tend to bring in their own staffs. Doesn't mean that there aren't holdovers, because there are. And maybe that's the case with Antonio Pierce, but with his image and what he's done and what he's kind of expressed, I'm not sure it can happen. Doesn't mean it won't. But what do you think of Mark's call there and his question?
Mark's in enemy territory over there. He's in Massachusetts over there by the Patriot Way. But
Yes.
I wonder how that goes for Mark. But we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, because a lot of people brought this up. Why not keep Antonio Pierce on as an associate or assistant head coach, whatever the title may be? And I think that's the ideal situation if he's not going to be the head coach for a lot of Raider fans. But I've been asked this question a lot, and I will say to Mark what I said to people on the X Twitter is that decision comes down to two men. Only two men can answer that question. First of all, whoever is the head coach has to want Antonio Pierce on the staff. And a lot of people say, well, why wouldn't he want Antonio Pierce on the staff? Look what Antonio Pierce has done. As you said, sometimes when head coach, not sometimes, but a lot of times when head coaches come in, they want their own guys. And Antonio Pierce may not be in that head coach's circle. That's just the politics of it.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of it is, does Antonio Pierce want to be a part of that head coach's staff, or does he want to chase other opportunities? On Wednesday, the Titans requested to speak with Antonio Pierce for their head coaching job. He may get other defensive coordinator opportunities somewhere else. He may say, I want to be a defensive coordinator somewhere else versus being an associate head coach with the Raiders under a new staff. It's all up to Antonio Pierce and the head coach. They have to make that decision. It's not something where, okay, the fans want it, so Antonio Pierce is definitely going to do it. He has to do what's best for him and his career.
Yeah, and that's what people, I think, forget, because they like somebody and they want him to stick around. But
Yeah, of course,
Antonio Pierce has a life. He's got a family. He's got his thing, and so he's got to do what's best for him. So we appreciate that. Mark, thank you for the call. Next, we go to a longtime listener who writes us quite a bit and now left us a voicemail. It's Anders, our good man. Here he goes.
Hi, guys. This is Anders from Oakland. I've called before and really encouraged by the last 9 games of the season. A couple of downfalls, but that's okay. I had a question to see if you guys think this can be sort of fixed with Aiden. He is obviously a little slow at times, but when you see his 2-minute drills, the 2-minute run against Indy, the 2-minute run at the end of the first half, it seems to me that when he analyzes less and just goes for it and speeds things up, things seem to go a lot better. Not running the play clock down to 2 seconds and taking forever to get off the first read. And even when he throws to the first read, he sometimes takes too long, and it's just paralysis almost. Do you think that's something that he can work on and get better at and move a little bit faster? Forget the mobility, but just being able to process a little bit quicker and get through his reads and not throw behind guys as a result of being a little bit slow at times. Just curious to hear your thoughts, because I think if he can improve that, he stands a pretty decent chance, I think, of making an impact again next year. Curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Anders, thank you so much for your call from Oakland. We appreciate you always. You're always there and always have great stuff. And listen, he brings up a lot of points. I got a lot of people telling me, Mo, that Aiden O'Connell has to be the starter next year. No, but to Anders' point, I think that the upsides with Aiden O'Connell are clearly there. And I think he focused on one of the things that he's got to work on. The mobility thing is a different animal to talk about. But when you talk about decision-making, releasing the ball quicker, because a lot of the times he got sacked, he could make up for the mobility by getting rid of the ball faster. There's no question. We also saw him throw behind receivers because he doesn't release the ball fast enough. Those are all things with the right coaching he can get much better at, no question. And I would expect him to. He's a smart kid. He makes good decisions usually, but that is one of the glaring, besides the mobility, to me, that is the other glaring issue that he's really got to tackle in the offseason going into camp next year.
In my opinion, to answer Anders' question, there are two things that can help Aiden O'Connell in that sense when it comes to processing the defense and making quick decisions. And we talked about this before. One, I think the Raiders should continue or use more motion. Whoever is the offensive play caller, use more motion, because that helps define a lot of the targets, a lot of the reads for the quarterback. Helps predetermine certain things. That the quarterback locks on a receiver, but it gets guys out in open space or gets some matchups that you're going to see downfield, and you can go to that matchup. But Devontae Adams one-on-one with the safety or whatever the case may be. The other thing is, with natural experience, more playing time usually comes improvement for even average quarterbacks. So the more Aiden O'Connell sees, the more games that he plays, he'll be able to process things a lot faster and make quicker decisions. I think you saw that in the Vikings game, where I think Brian Flores is known for blitzing. And what Brian Flores did in that game is he dropped a lot of guys in coverage, and it may have confused or caused Aiden O'Connell to hold the ball a little bit longer because he's trying to process what he's seeing, because he's expecting blitz, and he's seeing 8-man in coverage. He said he's seeing 7-man in coverage. So that part of it is, the more he sees, the better he'll get at knowing what to do when things change up on him and make quicker decisions.
No question. And that's the thing. Listen, we've always been very complimentary of Aiden O'Connell. That's not our job. Our job isn't to make guys look good, but we believe, and I've said this on the record, that I believe that he can be the number 2 quarterback there. It doesn't mean that at times he might not be the starter because of injury or whatever, and he can win games for you. I mean, he shows that. He showed that he can win games. He shows to me, Mo, that he belongs in the NFL and that you develop him, right? You got him for 5 years, okay, at a very cheap rate. So develop him and make sure you when you have to turn to him, he's ready to go. And I think that this year was so valuable for him to be able to do that for all the reasons you said and just getting that experience. So I look at Aiden O'Connell, and I know people throwing stats at me. Well, his stats were better than Bryce Young. Okay, but you're the same people who were telling me that you can't just look at Derek Carr for stats. He didn't win games, right? So stats are great. And he's certainly, Aiden O'Connell, I think, for what he was given and for where he was at, did a fine job. It's just overall, the Raiders still need a more dynamic quarterback to become a championship team. I think that's pretty simple and straightforward.
Here's my problem with comparing stats between quarterbacks on different teams. Okay, so if you put Aiden O'Connell in that Carolina Panthers offense, what would his stats look like? Because that's what you should be comparing.
Right.
Because let's remember, Bryce Young his best wide receiver, again, was 33, 34-year-old Adam Thielen. He didn't have Devontae Adams.
Right.
He didn't have Josh Jacobs behind him. He didn't have a decent offensive line this year. So
right.
I'm wary of people comparing stats between quarterbacks in different offenses. But I will say, I'm not taking anything away from Aiden O'Connell. 2 things can be true. Aiden O'Connell has shown that he can develop. He has shown that he can bounce back off of bad performances, and that's good for a QB2. But he wasn't good enough to the point that you can say he's definitely our week 1 starter. And that's why the Raiders have to draft a quarterback this offseason. And
I echo and paraphrase the words of Antonio Pierce, who just a week and a half ago said, yeah, we started Aiden O'Connell. He gives us the best chance to win, but we don't expect Aiden O'Connell to win games for us. And I think that's the difference, right? Is that when you have a dynamic quarterback, when you have a quarterback like a CJ Stroud, those are the kind of quarterbacks that change the game. Because CJ Stroud, even in Houston, didn't have a great offensive line, some receivers that developed and that were good picks. So you got to give credit to their front office. So it all depends, but he had different strengths. So it's hard to compare guys, and you got to compare Aiden O'Connell from where he was, how he, to your point, bounced back from difficult performances, and he did a good job there. All right. Anders, thank you so much for your call. Next, we get to Tarek, our good buddy Tarek, who is back in Chicago. He's no longer vacationing or traveling on business. Here he is.
Good evening, Scott. Good evening, Mo. Tarek here, checking in with you guys from the Windy City. Nice win over the Donkeys. It's a fantastic way to end the season. And you know what? Batter up, Mark Davis. Time to step up to the plate and make a really difficult decision. I think with Antonio Pierce finishing 5-4, 3 straight division wins with a rookie quarterback and an interim offensive coordinator, the fewest penalties in the entire league. I mean, when's the last time the Raiders could say that, if ever? And when you have guys like Max Crosby and Devontae Adams, two of your, obviously your biggest leaders on the team, Max Crosby quoted as saying, I've made the playoffs 1 time in 5 years. I'm tired of losing. I'm tired of rebuilds. Devontae Adams endorsing the return of Antonio Pierce. Legendary greats like Jim Plunkett, Charles Woodson, Marcus Allen, all endorsing Antonio Pierce. The crowd chanting AP. I mean, it just makes sense. It seems like you have the right guy in the building moving forward, but I understand that Mark Davis is going to do his due diligence. I do think that when you consider that Mark Davis is still paying Gruden, Ziegler, and McDillweed, you have to consider those type of things. I think AP would certainly be more cost efficient because he's not going to command top dollar, top market money, considering he's never been a head coach at this level before. You have to consider those type of things moving forward. I think I've also heard that if Jim Harbaugh does return to the NFL, he's possibly facing some sort of a suspension due to the scandal at Michigan. Again, Mark Davis, he's going to, all eyes are watching at this point, curious what he's going to do. But it does appear that Antonio Pierce I think, is in the driver's seat to get the position. I do concede that Harbaugh would also be a good addition to as the head coach. But if I had to choose between the two, it would be an absolute no-brainer, considering what Antonio has done regarding the culture and just the fever pitch of the fan base and the players, the momentum we had going into this, when he did take over and how the season concluded. So, the draft is going to be right around the corner. Free agency is going to be right around the corner. You got to get this right, Mark Davis. Do the right thing. Bring back AP. Tell me what you guys think at this point. Have a great rest of your week. Look forward to your next show. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
All right, there you go. Tarek in Chicago. Appreciate you calling in again, my friend. Couple things I want to get to, Mo, and I know people won't like this, so I'm just going to say it up front. Okay. Couple things. The money thing. Well, he's already paying Gruden. He's paying that. I don't understand why people care about that. What? It's not against your salary cap. It's not. It doesn't matter. And by the way, who's gone cheap on coaches in the division? The Chargers. And how has it resulted for them? Right? They've had a lot of talent. We were talking about this. You and I and Evan Grote from Just Pod Baby were talking about this by text just today. And they had talent there. Tom Telesco got fired too, but they had talent there, but they've never invested on a coach. Now, so much so that they're saying, oh, well, we're going to spend on a coach. So I don't think being cheaper is a good reason, with all due respect, Tarek, to select Antonio Pierce. I think that actually takes away from what he's been able to do. Number two, the suspension. Who cares? So let's say the NFL suspends him for 4 games. So what? He's still going to be coaching the team. He's going to be there for 6 years or whatever the thing is. And I'll remind you that Antonio Pierce resigned at Arizona State. That was the job he had right before he joined the Raiders because of NCAA violations. He did not get suspended. He wasn't the head coach, of course. Herm Edwards was, but he was he was identified as the guy who kind of ran the recruiting violations that occurred at ASU. He did not get suspended. So a lot of these guys who come from college, yes, they have things. I'm just not that. If I would not be concerned about it, because I don't think at the end of the day, even if something is proven, the NFL will say they'll consider it. I just don't see them doing anything unless there's some federal law broken and he's really just complicit in it and it's just crazy. Then I could see the NFL doing it. So those two things I just don't see as a negative per se. And then number 3, Mo, and then I'll let you talk and I'll shut up. Number 3 is this idea of like, okay, so went 5. And again, I'm not taking anything away from Antonio Pierce, but remember within that 5-4 record, you had a performance where you scored no points. You lost 3-0. Not everything was rosy. Not everything was perfect. Not saying it should be, but I think people are romanticizing parts of it and they're not looking at other parts of it as well. So I'm not saying that Antonio Pierce, because we said last segment, I'm on record as saying if it's not Harbaugh, then I'm fine with Pierce being the coach. But let's be realistic. Let's be honest and say, if Antonio Pierce gets the job, he has challenges just like any other coach would.
I'll take the first 2 of your points and go in a different direction. I don't disagree with you on either of your first 2 points. But what I will say, just generally speaking, Jordan Schultz was on the Bleacher Report airways, and he said when it comes to Harbaugh, whether it's the Chargers or the Raiders, money's not an issue.
Right.
So money is not a factor here. Jordan Schultz has said that. Multiple other reporters and insiders have said teams understand Harbaugh just winning a national championship is going to cost them top dollar. Mm-hmm. And they're willing to pay that top dollar to bring him in because he has a winning track record. So when it comes to winning, money is not a factor here. So I'll throw that out, the whole money issue. The second thing about the suspension, and I'll take a different road here too than you, slightly different road, is so what? Okay, let's say Harbaugh suspended for 6 games. But let's say you get Harbaugh for 5, as you said, for 5-6 years. I'll take the 6-game suspension. He'll still be the head coach. He's still going to be putting together a staff to run his program while he's away from the team or can't coach a team on game day. So if it means a 6-game suspension to get a team back to the playoffs, I'm willing to take that hit if the suspension comes. By the way, we don't even know if the NFL will suspend Jim Harbaugh. So that is basically on, if, might, maybe. I'm not gonna worry about the if, might, maybe if I'm getting Jim Harbaugh to coach my football team for the long term. The other thing about culture, and I understand, I respect what Antonio Pierce did for the culture, and
Absolutely.
that is a factor. That is
Sure.
a major factor, and why he's a top candidate, and why I have him as the number 2 candidate behind Jim Harbaugh. But you know what trumps all of that? Winning. Because then when you win, that becomes your culture. And under Al Davis during his year, just win, baby, that was the culture. Winning. It's great to have all of that, all the other support from the players. I get it. Max Crosby and Devontae Adams endorsing him. He turned the locker room around. So of course the players are going to endorse him. But if you're bringing in the Jim Harbaugh, who I said in the second segment hasn't had a losing full season since 2008. And mind you, he hasn't taken a break from coaching. So this isn't like a John Gruden where he was out of coaching for 8, 9, 10 years. He's been coaching this whole time. Hasn't had a losing season since 2008. That's 16 years. He's turned on every program with the exception of Stanford in 1 year. Took him 2 years at Stanford. So if you're telling me that I have to sign up for a 4 to 6 game suspension for a guy who has a proven track record of winning and over 70% win percentage in the pros and college, I'll take that. I'll take that over. And again, proven track record, proven winner. It's not about the big name for me. It's about the track record that Harbaugh brings if he comes into those Raider doors.
Yes, and that's the thing, is that you look at it and people want to nitpick and go back and say, well, he didn't win this and he didn't win that. It's like, no, every year, to your point, except for 2008, he's had a winning season, and that included taking over a Michigan program. Yes, it took him 9 years to win a national championship. Oh my gosh, some people never win one, by the way, but he took him from 1 year that the program at Michigan was dead. Took it over. First year goes 8-5, goes to bowl game. Went to a bowl game every year except for the COVID year because they didn't have them. And again, just continues to win. Has never lost more than 5 games in 2017. That's the only year he was 8-5. Still had a winning record. So yes. And by the way, Tarek, I think Raider legends supporting, of course they're going to support the current coach. You think a Raider legend's going to come in there and say, hey, listen, I love Antonio, but man, they got to find a different coach. No. And I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying you're going to support who the coach is now until he's not the coach.
Especially if he turned the team around.
Exactly. So you feel good about him and you want him to do well. But you get these guys in a room and say, hey, the Raiders offered Jim Harbaugh. Would you be mad if Jim Harbaugh became the coach? You'd be, no. Just ask Charles Woodson. Right? They wouldn't be.
Right.
But your point is well taken. He's galvanized people together, and that is important. And it's huge. And that's why he, to me, is 1A. If Jim Harbaugh doesn't take it, he's 1A. He's the guy you go to and you give him the chance, take the risk, and you go. I'm totally fine with that. So, Tarek, thank you so much for that. Just again, great calls, Mo, as always. On our mailbag, we appreciate when people call in and give us an opportunity to talk to them and answer their questions and espouse our own opinions, which we're pretty good at doing, I think. Not that you agree with them all the time, but hey.
I like the fact that we get the rational. I'm sure you probably get the voicemails and emails that we can't talk about, but I'm glad we get a dose of the rational fans that can agree and disagree with us.
Yes.
And still love the show, even if they disagree with us. And those, I will say, those are some of the most, hardcore. Not I won't say hardcore, but loyal fans. The ones that will say, I don't disagree. I disagree with their perspective here.
Yeah.
But I still love the show because that shows that we can respect each other. We can both look at a situation, have a different opinion, and still respect each other and move forward.
Yes. And that's what I love about it. Again, I don't mind. Look, I'm wrong all the time. I'm never 100%. Nobody ever is. We're not a big hot take show. So, I have some people, why don't you take a stance on that? It's like, well, because there's no stance. I'm just giving you the information and giving you an informed opinion. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to think. I'm going to tell you what I think. And Mo does the same thing. And you're right. Even people who we have longtime listeners who I interacted with on X.com who disagree with me all the time. It's the people who jump in and it's like, you're an idiot, or, make physical attribute comments about me or you or whoever it is that made the point. It's like, okay, if that's your argument, have fun. Have fun with it. But we love doing it. And I learn from people when I'm wrong. Sometimes I learn that I make comments about the turf at Allegiant Stadium and people get really upset about it. And you're like, wow, that's incredible. You guys are really defensive of the turf. But I expect it. Raider Nation is passionate. They're the best fans there are. So you get that. All right, Mo, we are getting out of here on this Thursday. Tell me, what do you got coming up this week people need to watch out for?
I have an article, or I have a column out on Sportsnot that matches general manager, and head coaching candidates together. So I'm not just doing a top 5 head coaching candidates or a top 5 general manager candidates. I'm putting them together, matchmaking them, and saying, okay, what's the best general manager head coach ticket for the Raiders, similar to presidency and vice presidency. So just think of it that way.
Ah, look at that.
Yeah.
The matchmaker over here. Wow.
Yeah, that's what I do. I helped the woman get engaged. Remember that 3 weeks ago?
Yes.
Or 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Guy proposed to his fiance. So I'm continuing that theme. Matchmaking Mo. That's who I am.
They're going to put you on, what's that? I forgot what channel that Indian matchmaker is on, and the other one is going to be Mo the matchmaker. He's going to put together single people in Raider Nation and put them together.
One quick short story. There's a woman that I'm well acquainted with who got me involved in watching 90 Day Fiance. And,
oh boy.
And I've tried to
It's a
avoid
trap.
it. I've tried to avoid it. Trust me, Scott. I tried to say no. I'm not watching 90 Day Fiance. I'm not going to do it. She got me to watch it, and I will say, Scott, it's very interesting.
Oh my gosh,
it's very interesting.
Interpersonal dynamics are interesting. I get that. It's like human behavior. Like because I know you, Mo. I know how smart you are, and I know you're not watching it for the salacious piece of it. You're watching it because you're like, look at these people go. Like, look at what's going on here from a mind and a drama and all that perspective. So I can see that.
It's Scott, the way some people think.
It'll
blow your mind, Scott.
Oh yeah, we just talk about the coaching search and you get that too. So we know that pretty good. So, all right. Well, make sure you check out Mo's work up on Bleacher Report and follow him up on x.com at Moe Moton, MoeMoton. Also, you can follow my work. I'll be working over the weekend. So with the wild card playoffs, check out sportsnot.com. I'll be doing some work up there, including a piece on the Miami Dolphins. What's going on with them? I know it's kind of crazy, but we'll continue to watch the Raiders coaching situation for the most updates on that. We'll be back with you guys next week, and we'll be a little more sporadic with content, but we'll drop stuff in. And I think as we move along, might even just jump in and do some lives here and there just for fun and see what everybody's up to. But we certainly appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. If you're listening to us on the radio in Las Vegas, thank you so much for doing that. And we will talk to you early next week. This has been Silver and Black Today. We thank our producer, Mike Robier. For Moe Moton, I am Scott Gulbransen. We will talk to you next week, Raider Nation. Thanks for being with us.